Boundless Spirit, pushing the limits of talk radio with Charlene Springer.
Welcome to Boundless Spirit Radio with Charlene Springer. And today we have an awesome guest. I've been trying to get her for a while. This is Victoria Moore. And Victoria is a mystic and spiritual teacher who radiantly embodies the qualities of self-realization. She has done so many other things with this. And, coming from her background as a ballet dancer into her true self now. So we're going to play with that. We're going to find out all about Victoria this morning. So please welcome Victoria Moore.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, Charlene. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you on today. I am so excited to finally get to talk to you because we have some common friends, and when you're in that circle of people, I know that you're an awesome person, so I can't wait to get to know you better. So first of all, you are what we call a mystic. So we save that phrase, mystic, so for very few people. So how do you consider yourself a mystic?
Well, it's one way of describing a being who is very attuned to frequencies or energies. And I had started along this path many, many years ago as a spiritual aspirant. And then I stumbled into this amazing, complicated, complex, sometimes difficult teacher who was a mystical teacher among many other disciplines that we worked together on. And through his training, I came to understand myself as having a certain affinity for that particular flavor, we could say, of the spiritual journey, of the journey of awakening. And it's a way of having a certain kind of, one of my friends describes it as a certain kind of street savvy, spiritually speaking. Mm-hmm. You probably can guess what friend uses that phrase.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things.
Fun. I was looking. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I was looking at the array of guests that you had on. Oh, there's Lucia. Oh, Amelia. Oh, Sven. Oh, Susan. David. Oh, my God.
We have all the fun people on that show.
Yeah, they are. Oh, boy, are they.
Yes. So you didn't start off being a spiritual being per se as a title. You started off as a dancer. So what happened and how did you even get to the dance mode? Because dance is about movement. Dance is about frequency and rhythm. So tell us about your journey into dance and then where it evolved from there.
Sure. Well, actually, when I was about 6 or 7, I realized that, the magical childhood time was over. And I looked around at suburban Southern California, and I was like, get me out of here quickly. And it took a while, but by the time I was about 10 or 11, I realized that a career in the ballet would be a good way out. And actually what I was searching for was something higher to live for. Sorry about that. Something beyond what I saw around me. This was, the 50s, 60s, but no, 50s at that point in suburban Southern California. So I actually really logged on to ballet as a way of connecting to a higher frequency, actually, in life. And I was very, very fortunate that I stumbled upon an amazing teacher who was a mystic herself, and I worked with her for several years. She actually, the two of us together, completely restructured my body. And she worked with energy. She worked as a mystic with transference of understanding the dynamics of energy in a way that nobody else I knew at the time worked. She'd had the opportunity to watch. Now, this is a long time ago, right? This is the 50s in the United States. But she'd had the opportunity to observe the Bolshoi Ballet and the Kirov Ballet in rehearsal and in class when they were in Los Angeles. So she had an understanding of how to use the body energetically that you now see all dancers, modern ballet, whatever, using. But back then, American dancers were really kind of stiff, and they didn't have that ability to move from the core and from the back the way the Russians did. And so in my working with her, she was actually my first mystical teacher. And because of her, I was able to have a career as a professional ballet dancer in New York, which at that point in time was the only place to be.
Wow. So we just had a minor little thing happen.
I heard some little blips.
It never fails. It never fails. So I know what was amazing is that I was like the Joffrey Ballet also. That is beautiful.
Yeah. I wasn't with them very long.
Mm-hmm.
It was clear to me later that there was a reason for me. Now I look back and I can see there was a reason. It's perfect. You know how Spirit does everything perfectly, right? So there was a reason for me to have studied with this teacher. Her name, she's no longer in body, but her name was Harriet DeRay. Because of the way she worked with me, it has translated into how I work with people in meditation now, and in what I would call cellular illumination or conscious embodiment. Yeah. And then, but it was important that she could take me all the way into several, I was in New York for about 5 or 6 years, and I danced professionally for like 4 of those years. But it was important for me to have made that transition and been able to attain that career, but it wasn't where I was supposed to stay. So, of course, I had this horrific marriage to a rock musician because we had rock ballets in the Joffrey Company in those days. And that was a total disaster, which then caused me to have one of those, nervous breakthroughs where I no longer, my contract was not renewed with the ballet company. And that was good because it actually pushed me into taking my meditation practice seriously. I had learned meditation while I was on tour with the ballet company in 1970, 71. But I had, with that kind of a schedule, it was really hard to do the 20 minutes twice a day thing. But once I lost my position in the ballet company and this, very, my first dark night of the soul, I guess you could say. That really got me on to my, I found that I actually very quickly, relatively speaking, moved through that phase because of the practice of meditation, and then that got me, off to becoming a teacher of meditation, transcendental meditation.
Why did you choose TM, or did it choose you, I should say?
It chose me, pretty much. This was 1970, and at that point in time, there was Yogananda's ashram in Los Angeles, and there was TM. And that was about it. And TM was beginning to become ubiquitous, but not as it became later, much more available. But yeah, we were on tour in Berkeley, and I decided that I wanted, I knew that I needed something like that, and I just wanted to learn to meditate. So went down to the local TM center, and that's when I got started. But I didn't. It took it took that phase of my life when things became so difficult, and I think this is true for many people. It's it's the carrot and the stick, and for many people, it's the stick that gets them into their spiritual journey in a serious way.
Well, something you always have to have that disaster happen for you to go, is this really what I want for me?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the minute you say no, things change. Yeah, it's beautiful. So now going into TM, you also did yoga for a while too. And,
well, yeah.
And what did you do for a yoga practice?
Well, back in those days, I'm not sure how it is now, but in those days, there was a very simple set of asanas that was given to you when you were on one of those kind of courses, and you would do this little routine of asanas, pranayama, meditation. That was called round. And then you do another, and another, and another, And so I first started doing asanas and at that point in time, but a little later, gosh, it was actually a good time later in my journey, because it was some years later that I actually started taking yoga classes. It was, you know the story? Okay, well, first of all, I taught ballet for many years, and when I was teaching ballet, I also sort of incorporated some of the yogic stretching in the beginning of the ballet classes. But later, now we're on to my period of time where I was working with my teacher Rama. He actually gave me an assignment, which was to go open a yoga studio, and so I had to go take some yoga classes. He said, "Oh, of course you can do it. You're a ballet dancer." I had to take some yoga classes so I would know how to teach, and then I opened this yoga studio. I think I also had some videos that I watched or something at that time. Anyway,
no YouTube back then.
No YouTube. No, these are videos of what's that movie star?
Not Jane Fonda. Oh, Raquel Welch.
No, not Jane Fonda.
It
was Raquel Welch. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I just how these things go. I picked it up pretty easily, and then there was another point in time when I was doing a lot of consulting in Los Angeles, and I found that I was living at home in the Bay Area on the weekends, but during the week I'd be down in LA. And the only way I could handle LA was by going to yoga class every day. So anyway, through various methods, I started teaching yoga, and that was very fulfilling for me. Really lovely. Yeah. And
you were also an IT consultant?
Yeah, another mystical task.
We're going to see somewhere in the end how this all pulls together, what you do now. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So after my span of time where I was a TM teacher, and then I went to Switzerland for a year and did the TM City program and all of that, and then came back and was still very involved in the TM world. I was involved in the TM situation for about 13 years. And then I moved on to my next teacher, Rama, my mystical teacher. And right about that time that I started working with him, he wanted everybody to, I think what it was is he wanted us to get a left brain, because he had an awful lot of us artists and earthy, crunchy types. And it was actually very wise, because I know that for myself, it was a struggle, because I had opted not to go UCLA, but to go to New York to become a dancer. And even though I'd had a quality education up to that point, it was a struggle to learn how to think in the abstraction that the computer languages of that time were. We're talking, assembler and COBOL, and really down to the bits and bytes understanding. So it was very left brain. It was an excellent training, and it was also at that point in time, we're talking the early to mid 80s, it was a time when it was a very up and coming career. And he wanted all of us, especially the women, to be financially self-sufficient. That was part of coming into your sovereignty and your power as a woman, was to not buy into a very old paradigm belief system that young women now don't really seem to be affected by. But in my generation, there was this given that you were supposed to marry a man, and that's how you were going to be taken care of. So he was very big on us becoming financially independent. And really, it was very cool because at that point in time, my entire career in IS, from programmer to, I don't know, what were the stages? I went through being a programmer and then being an systems analyst and then finally into project management. And for me, it was all one big mystical task. And it was interesting because at the same time, it was like there were 3 or 4 pillars of intensity in life. There was very intense meditation, deep, intense meditation, which was easy for me, had always been very natural for me. Then there was this intense thinking, this using the mind really intensively. And to balance all that was also intense physical. So for me, I had, from the time I stopped dancing, I still had either, karate or aerobics, funk aerobics, Pilates in later years, yoga. I always had something physical as well. And that had to be balanced out by quality time in nature. So it was a very all-consuming, encompassing, but balanced way of, and that was a very important part of the mystical training. Oh, and then the other aspect, of course, was all the spiritual work, in addition to the meditation, but the studying the various traditions. And, he'd been a PhD, so he was pretty rigorous on that level.
I know, I wish I'd met Rama.
Well,
but he's around somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. As a matter of fact, I had a very happy run-in with him in 2014 in the Great Pyramid at Giza.
Oh, tell us about that.
Oh, that's much later in the story.
Okay,
but,
okay.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, he was great. I was very fortunate. I worked very closely with him. I always had these situations where I would end up being somehow in charge of a group. This had happened to me in the TM world, and it happened again when I was studying with Rama, which is a very interesting role to play. I learned a lot about not opting for the power over others way to approach people when I did that. It was intense. Otherwise, I was going to get skewered by these women. So I worked really hard at it, at learning how to facilitate things without, being the big boss.
Trying to be the boss of me, as they say.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Because the first thing people do is push back against that.
Oh, yeah. And it's so disempowering. It's so old paradigm, this power over others thing. So, I mean, I look back and I'm just amazed at the opportunities that I had to really learn so viscerally about. Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been beautifully orchestrated. That's really all I can say.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get in the other parts of this? This is what I'm so amazed at. I'm like, how many things did she do? So you became an ordained Buddhist monk and then a Correlate minister?
Yes.
When did you do that?
Well, that was part of the work with Rama. He kind of amalgamated all of these traditions, but he called it American Buddhism at one point in time. Things are always shifting with him. That was great. I mean, things are always shifting. We moved a lot. You've probably heard about this too. But I was ordained by him as a Buddhist monk, not a nun, but a monk, which indicated knowledge of a certain level of scripture, which was there. And it was very powerful. So when we travel forward, how was I ordained as a Correlate minister? Well, so at a certain point in time, I realized I'd been meditating at that point for many years, and I loved Rama dearly, but I realized that there was something that I was missing in my training, and also it was not too long before he passed away. But I had a friend that I had met in the 80s when she was a student of Boundless as well, and she had gone off on her own at a certain point and done what she called a cave experience, and she had also. You know her. You would recognize her. She was Celeste in the book Untitled Chapter, right?
Right.
So she had the benefit of working with Rama, but also she'd had a friend who was an astrologer and a Jungian. I don't know if she was a therapist, but she was Jungian, and she worked with Leslie on polarities, understanding how polarity works, understanding and really getting down to the very level of the architecture and structure of duality and separation. So Leslie had worked with both the spiritual information from Rama as well as the what she'd learned from this other friend of hers, and come up with a very interesting I guess we could call it, I mean, it's really a whole teaching. The marriage of spirit was what she called it. And it was how to work with, how to understand the ego. And I wouldn't, using the term clearing the ego actually has a little bit of a negative spin on it. I think it's more understanding how to, the way I perceive it at least, is how to get beyond the polarization of duality and bring that polarization into a unified place where it's really a perception of complements as opposed to polarized opposites. And so Leslie had evolved this work, and I ran into her many years later, like in 1997, and I was like, okay, whatever she's doing, it's a good thing. And so I started working with her, actually, in 1997, 98. And I worked very closely with Leslie for many years. As I said to you earlier, in 2000, we started Seeds of Light here in South Africa. And working with Leslie, and then working as a mentor and then a teacher of teachers in her teacher training program, and then actually becoming the director of the whole Enlightenment Studies program. at a certain point in there, it was time for me to be ordained, so I was ordained as a Correlate minister, because Correlate was a church and not a nonprofit educational institution, but a church.
Right. Because she wrote the book, The Marriage of Spirit, no?
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible stuff, because you were a big part of the book Unplugged from the Patriarchy. How was it to be love in that book?
Well, it's a fictionalized description of our journey.
Uh-huh.
I think, first, Lucia had this sense that the three of us were the sovereign, the warrior, and the seer. Mm-hmm. And I was the sovereign. And it is interesting. I mean, it's written quite accurately in the book. When we did all of our work, primarily, we did some of it in dialogue and looking at things and processing and all of that. But we did most of it internally. We would get together in a meditative state and do the work. And it just seemed like I was the one who was holding the space, who was mm-hmm. holding an alignment that allowed all that work to take place. Mm-hmm. So I think it was really lovely that I'm the representative of love, but I suppose it was a sense of holding for the whole to take place. Mm-hmm. Maybe in that sense it was love. It was quite a fascinating project.
Mm-hmm.
Quite fun, yeah.
Well, it was before its time. That was the first part.
It was. It's so interesting because somebody just happened to turn a friend of mine on, who turned me on to a book called When God Was a Woman. And that got Leslie and I kind of really involved in everything that was available at that point in time. I think there were several books, and we were just starting to hear about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And simultaneously, I mean, that part in the book where we run into each other, Lucia and I, in Whole Foods Market, that's exactly what happened. And I said, we're doing an event at my house this weekend. Why didn't you come? I was so thrilled to see her again, because we'd been very close for a long time, but we hadn't seen each other for a couple of years at that point, maybe 2 years or something. Mm-hmm. So that's, it was, we got together, and then, of course, we had our other friend join us, and, very fascinating to do that work at the time. And you're right, it was really ahead of its time.
Mm-hmm. So you began this journey of self, and how's that going for you?
The journey of self. Well, I think I see it now. I'm not that young, as you can tell from my mentions of life in the 50s and all that. It's a continuum, and it's an ever expanding continuum, which I find really inspiring. I'm very inspired by what comes through and what comes up. But I think I knew pretty early that really the most important thing to me was waking up. And even though I didn't quite see it at the time, that whole ballet career was part of that trajectory. And my understanding of what waking up meant kept changing and kept evolving as consciousness would evolve. But for me, meditation was pretty easy from the beginning. I look back, and I think because I had such body awareness, I realized pretty early on that it wasn't just a mental technique. It wasn't just a mental thing. And so I always, I don't know, I didn't have the kind of difficulty that many people have described to me with meditating. And that's just the way it was. It was just, that was kind of natural to me. And then when I worked with Rama, of course, it amplified, but I had already had a very solid meditation practice at that point in time. And but I learned a lot because I had come from kind of a totally Hindu, the TM movement kind of background.
Mm-hmm.
I learned much and really expanded the horizons working with him. Mm-hmm. And then it brought the whole other piece in when I started working with Leslie, because I realized that it was really necessary to do the egoic work in addition to meditating into vast states of consciousness. I mean, I think I had my first really full-on Samadhi experience. I was in Switzerland for a year with Maharishi, and I just went into this state where I was just, I was in the world but not of it, and I realized that everything was one continuous moment, and it was wonderful. Then I came back and, up and down. My Shakespearean type of stuff had to happen. But then it was very interesting. I look back now and I really see how Rama really set us all up to learn by our mistakes. And that was really good. I mean, it worked. It was effective. But then when I started working with Leslie and I learned about the egoic work and how the dynamics of duality worked, it was really, that I really realized that was a critical element. And so when I work with people now, I work, from various perspectives, but I always, and I do, I do feel that you can become very hung up on the egoic clearing work, and you can use it as a kind of as a weapon against yourself. And I've seen people do that where they kind of, they just, it's like they just keep processing and finding more things to process and finding more things to process, and they never get beyond the processing phase. And to me, it doesn't have to work that way. But it's, it's been a long journey. I mean, I've worked with the processing stuff for many, many years and have learned multiple modalities, mental and emotional and physical, with the processing, clearing.
Have you found a shortcut?
Yeah, actually, what I'm finding is that things do work more quickly now than they used to.
Yes.
And I do find that the whole element of self-love is really, really critical. In fact, it's the key. It really is the key. Just to talk about, all right, so we're kind of done with my history, right?
Right, yeah, we're done with your history for now.
Okay, good. All right, well, you can ask whatever you want to ask. But, so what I have found, what is very, very, very fulfilling for me when I'm, the way I work now is I have this very interesting connection with spirit and with the divine. At a certain point, my awareness shifted from understanding or knowing that I was a being who had a soul into a soul who's having a life. Just, it's a very subtle shift, but it changes everything. And it's really a level of soul realization. It's like in my path of awakening, and I think I mentioned this in my little bio, there did come a point in time, and I remember very well, I was here in South Africa at my little cottage. So it was sometime in the last 10 years. I realized how much I'd learned, how much I'd been given, how much I knew, but it was all what I had learned or been taught. And I was like, well, what do I really know? I've been through all this. I've had all these experiences. What is it that I really know? And that, I guess, was my who am I moment, And I went in and I had my own kind of little cave experience, you could say, where I just realized that there were so many ideas and teachings and traditions and understandings and words and more words and more words. And I was like, that's not the whole picture. There's something more here. And there's very hard for me to come up with words to describe it, but I went into this place of a kind of God realization, you could say, where I just recognized I could accept the fact. That's really what it is, I think, Charlene. It's accepting the fact that that is who you are. And you may have an egoic structure that is imperfect, but there are ways to really refine the sharp edges and get out of the spin and get out of the victim and tyrant and rebel and savior and even guru and disciple, which is just a benevolent form of victim and tyrant, if you ask me.
Yeah.
That beyond all that, we're all just the divine. And as that came first, and then this soul realization came after that. And an aspect of this soul realization is, and I catch myself slipping on this thin ice sometimes as well, but an aspect of this soul realization is this irrefutable understanding that this is all orchestrated, and it is all orchestrated for the benefit of consciousness, of awareness becoming aware of itself, of evolution, which, it's one of the teachings, but it's one thing to know that, and it's another to really viscerally experience that. And so what was I going to say? So what I'm seeing now, what I'm seeing is one of the so you're asking me fast, what's a quick path? One of the fastest ways of working with being able to really, really trust. Surrender is a word that can be used, but all of these things, being able to trust your intuition, to trust your guidance, to understand things happen. Some are really wonderful and some are really tough. And it's not that who you are as a being determines whether you have a tough challenge or something that's really easy. Who you are as a being is the choice of how you're going to respond to whatever it is. And so we all know this, right? It's not the events, it's how we respond to the events, which that's really the game. That's what we're doing. That's the thing here on Earth. And at a certain point, it's like that is why free will is an important piece, because free will is what gives us a choice of how to respond. And that's what we learn over the ages, over the lifetime or the lifetimes, is what responses bring us closer to truth and what responses bring us further away from truth. So what I'm seeing now is that it's because we're in this time of a huge transition, it's really critical to, number one, be in tune with your guidance and trust your guidance. And it's also really critical to understand that there is a bigger picture and that what's going on is messy and it's difficult and it's supposed to be this way, because this is where there are so many beings on the planet who are, working on their evolution, or who are seeking, who understand there's more to life than just, you know, just the third dimensional reality, and they want more, and they're going towards it. And but what hangs us up a little bit from trusting our intuition and from being able to deal effectively and respond from our highest self to difficult circumstances is these places where we don't really, honestly, sincerely, all the way down, trust in the divine. And I started playing. This is what I had an amazing trip. Took some amazing women to Egypt in early this year. And after that trip, I came back and I was really looking at this issue. And what I realized, it's very simple, is that as infants in this life, and let's not worry about past lives, because past lives will, my understanding of this, and I think it's really true, is whatever you want to work on in this life from a past life will show up and be presenced in your life in this life, in one way or another. So, which is why probably Patanjali said, don't get messed up thinking about your past life. Because if it's something you're supposed to work on, believe me, and if it's something you're supposed to work on, it'll show up in this life, right? So, but what I really see and have seen is that as infants, when we are very vulnerable, very open, we haven't, the structure of our dualistic or consciousness, our ego, hasn't been laid in place exactly. But we've just come in, and some of us, it was nice and easy, and some of us got, drugged and then spanked when we came in, and that is its own little dilemma. But our parents, no matter how wonderful they were, whether they didn't read Dr. Spock and they were just always there for you, or if they did read Dr. Spock, then they definitely got programmed into this. As infants, there are times when your parents just couldn't meet your needs. And as infants, your needs and your desires are one and the same, right? There's no difference. You're hungry. You need food and you desire food, or your diapers are wet and you need to be changed, or you are feeling terrified and you need to be loved. They're one and the same. Later in life, that's where we get this disconnect of needs and desires getting very intertwined. But as an infant, they are one and the same. And parents, no matter how wonderful they're trying to be, can't always do it. They just can't. I mean, I know when I had my son, if he got hungry and we were driving on the freeway, I could not feed him in that moment. So at that moment, I, as God, because that's who, to an infant, their caretaker or their parent is God, I did not meet his needs. Therefore, in that soft clay of the little being and securely stored in the unconscious is not just a belief that God doesn't have my back, but the absolute certainty of it. And, an infant isn't going to ponder this and go, well, listen, 10 times the needs weren't met, but 100 times they were, so let's just let go of that 10%. That 10% gets stored in the unconscious. So, and that is really what turns into what you could call the deprived child persona in consciousness. And so we have these moments where we realize we're not really meeting life from the place of really trusting the divine and knowing that radical change is exactly what we need in the moment, but radical change seems like a disaster. And that's because stored within the unconscious is experience that tells us you cannot trust the divine. So what I've been working with people lately on the processing front is reclaiming those fragments of consciousness that we could call the deprived child persona. And it's really easy. I mean, you have to, my approach to it is very much of a mystical, energetic approach where you basically become an alchemical chamber. That's a phrase of an intensive that David and I gave. But it's a perfect phrase for this, where you, as an alchemical chamber, can be both the experience of that infant as well as the nurturing parent or caregiver who wasn't there at the time. But you can actually revive that experience and be the caretaker. And basically, it's just pure, unconditional love that takes care of it.
Wow. So now, when you see people do things a little bit differently, like they're doing, they're starting this process. They want something. They're on that mission to discover who they are, and they come across all these different ways, all these different schools of thought. So they feel, okay, then we have to define ourselves. So we need a label. And basically they get attached to the labels. Oh, we need to have this cathartic experience. We have to, you've got to go deep and have all this come out of you, or you can't find you, or, you've got to beat yourself up a little bit for all the wrong things that you've done. What do you say to people like that? Because we've all done this.
Yeah. Well, I usually tell people, I really tried that. It doesn't work. Really, like I can give you an example. Like if you've ever read The Marriage of Spirit or looked at any of those tools, those processing tools, I had come to the point where I was like, I really wasn't interested. It felt like it was getting way too mental, and it also felt like there was this element of self-judgment and criticism that just was creeping in all the time. And what happens when you do that is the resistance goes up. It's like this resistance wall that wants to protect the innocence of your heart goes up. And then you're just stuck. I mean, you can just like process and process and process. And it's just the resistance. Actually, it's like a pearl inside of the shell. The resistance is how the pearl builds up. So I really believe that you have to take on any of that kind of processing work from a witness that's not only neutral, but loving and nurturing. And it's really fascinating because like I said, I thought I was kind of done with doing squares. And then over the last couple of years, I've been working both with larger groups, but also with a smallish group. And they love doing squares. And they get so involved. I mean, we have so much fun and so much energy gets moved because everybody is like just, it's not like digging into my depths. It's more like, oh yeah, this can happen, and then this can happen. And it's a different attitude. And I think I learned way back when I first started teaching ballet after I'd been a professional dancer and I came back. I realized that my consciousness, when I was teaching a class, completely affected how well the students could do. I realized, I know, and it's because it's really physical, right? And you really see. I realized if I was off, it made things much more difficult for the students. So as a teacher in a class, I realized I had to keep a certain kind of consciousness in order for people to get the most benefit. And somehow that has stayed with me all these years. And so I realized that my role in working with people in in part, is to hold a field that allows them to reach in whatever direction they want to without guilt, without judgment, and just in support, feeling supported.
Mm.
That makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, this is all we want, but as I said, sometimes people start on a journey, they don't know where to go.
Yeah, yeah, there's so much out there.
Yeah.
There's so many, there's so many tools. And I mean, initially I was in traditions where, it's like if you left, you were excommunicated.
Sounds like the Catholic Church.
It's like my whole circle of friends were TM teachers and all of that. And then when I decided I wanted to study with Rama, I was like, my name was mud.
Yeah.
And then a little bit of that happened as well with me with Rama. I have had to make choices to leave when it was time to leave. And so I am not one who feels like, oh my God, you're being a spiritual dilettante. If you look around to find what works for you. Mm. Because the truth is, the ultimate truth is, it's inside. It's already inside. And your soul is your ultimate teacher. I know in the non-dual or the Advaita tradition, they talk about it as the Sat Guru. And that's my experience, that ultimately it's finding what gives you access to what's inside. Mm. And that's the identity, is as the soul that you are. And the cool thing about soul identity, is that even very young souls at the level of the soul, which very young souls here on this planet are probably not going to realize themselves as a soul, because that's not the phase of their journey they're in. But old souls, people like you, or people who would be listening to this radio show, at the level of the soul, there is the knowledge that, or a true knowing that we've never been separate. Mm. That even though we take on incarnations and we embody and we do all these things, we are not separate. And that experience, the direct perception without mental modification, one of my favorite phrases from my friend Rama, that sort of separation is actually, it may be true on one level of frequency, but at the level of frequency that you're functioning on, it's not true. It's just not true. We've never been separate. Mm. So I feel like whatever methods, teachers, meditations, I mean, I have so many friends, and that all offer something unique and different. And Nelia offers one way, and she really reaches a lot of people. Lucia and I are actually in many ways similar, but Lucia also has another way. Sven and Susan do something else. David does something else. And all these amazing beings that you've brought on your show, they all have different things to offer. And my experience is that you may need different things at different times. And there's nothing wrong with searching out. It's an adventure to find what allows you to find you.
I know from my experience, I see that when I've done another step, then it's time to move on. And usually I say goodbye to one teacher and the next one shows up, or there's a quiet phase and, I see a movie or a book or an old book that I've had for years will show up. And,
Yeah. It's like, spirit's guiding you always, or your higher self at the soul level. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's just, and so this period of time that we're in is just such a, it's really quite challenging, but I think it's amazing.
Well, you see people grow faster.
Very fast, yeah.
Years ago, what took 10 years is now taking 3 months. So,
and even faster than that. And then, of course, you've got these beings who are very advanced, not necessarily even from this star system, coming in, and they're in younger bodies. And it's not like they don't need, they have challenges. And beautifully, it's been orchestrated such that those of us that are older and what we've gone through has equipped us to lay the groundwork and help them meet the challenges that they have, which are very different from the ones we had. But they're amazing. They're amazing. So I took this trip in earlier this year. I took a group of, it was a small group. There were 9 of us all together, including myself and my friend Jane, who has been leading trips, sacred journeys to Egypt for 25 years. And in the old days, she used to lead like 3 or 4 a year. I mean, a lot. She's gone a lot.
Wow.
And I've been about 6 times, or 5 or 6 times myself. Neither of us had ever had a trip like we had with these younger starseed types. It was amazing. Every single, when you go to Egypt, you pay thousands of dollars to have a private visit in the Great Pyramid, or at the Pause of the Sphinx, or at the Temple of Isis. And there are all these other temples. And, if you want a private visit, which means they close it off to everybody else, you pay thousands of dollars. Well, so we had 3, the Sphinx, Pause, and the Great Pyramid, and Isis that we had paid. And we just thought we'd go to the others with the other tourists. We had a private visit at every single site we went to, including the e-ticket ride at the Valley of the Kings, the King Tut's tomb. I mean, I'd never been there, and none of the girls had been there, so we just bought extra tickets, and we thought, no, we don't mind. Tourists, no problem. So we went down, and there were about, a dozen people, and we just quietly stood behind them and waited, and they were going to move, and then we would be in the front, and all of a sudden we looked around, it was just us. And it was just us for a whole half an hour.
Wow.
And then at the end, we walk up the steps, and all of a sudden this huge horde of Chinese, a group of Chinese tourists,
comes through,
coming down the steps. I mean, that was unbelievable. So the frequency that the group held was so high that it was just a very different kind of trip. And my friend Jane said she'd never been on a trip like that, and I certainly never had either. So that was my firsthand experience of how incredibly clear and high frequency these women, and they were drawn to this trip to Egypt. So obviously they were very advanced beings.
What was that experience like? Cool. I know, but what, we'll talk about that again in the Woo Hour. So again, people listening, you want to tune into the Woo Hour, and we'll go deeper into the trip. So now, how can people get in touch with you, and any events? What events do you have coming up next?
Okay, well, I have a challenge event coming up in a week. I haven't actually put out the email, but yes, it's a challenge. I'm saying, okay, are you ready to put it out on the line? I feel like all of the things that are happening right now are what I would call an ascension accelerator. And, the election in the U.S., and I mean, horrific things are happening. I think it's time for all of us who have, no matter how long we've been on a spiritual path, it's time to really own that change starts from inside, and it's up to each of us to really let that be what changes the world. Consciousness leads events, consciousness leads actions. And I see people believing that in their minds, but not really believing it all the way through. And I know one way to start to really recognize this truth is to do things that are outside of your comfort zone. And I think we're going to be asked to do things outside of our comfort zone for the next couple of years, probably, but it'll all be facilitating a very rapid growth in consciousness. So my challenge is I'm holding a free or by donation meditation and transmission on the solstice next week, and it's 9:30 p.m. Pacific time on the 20th, which is like 12:30 a.m. East Coast time, and 5:30 a.m. in UK, 6:30 a.m. here. And it's going to be, an actual, we'll have a call. It'll be, it'll be a call. It's not just a synchronized meditation. Everybody does it at home. No.
Right.
It's an actual event. And I just know this is one of the mystical tricks that I learned from Rama. Is that if you really want to make a gesture to spirit, to the oneness, that shows you're serious. And so I think I'm gonna start offering challenge type things for people, because I think that's what gets us to really move beyond our comfort zone. Mm-hmm. So I'm offering that next week on the solstice, and I also have another process I was talking to you about of reclaiming the deprived child. I'll be doing an event on that at the end of the month, and then we haven't really talked about it, but one of the most important elements of my growth in the last 20 years of my journey has been my experiences of living in Africa, coming to Africa, starting a nonprofit to work with marginalized communities, and living, as I am right now, at the base of the Bladder River Canyon, which is also at the base of the Nilotic Meridian. We'll talk about that in the woo-woo hour.
Okay.
But so I am offering a trip with a friend of mine, Awakening Your African Soul, that will take place in starts at the end of September and ends, I think it starts on the 26th and ends on the 11th of October. And we still have 3 spots for that. So, we could have talked about that for an hour. What it does for a Westerner who lives in their head to walk on African soil.
Yeah.
Have you ever been here, Charlene?
Not South Africa, Northern Africa, Morocco.
Yeah.
And I remember even just first seeing Africa from Gibraltar. I was on a cruise and looking through the telescope and seeing the physical land of Africa. I was in tears. It was just a weird thing. I'm like, why am I crying? I didn't even know why I was crying. And then when I first stepped foot on it, it's a different animal. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like once you have stepped foot on Mother Africa, your life will never be the same. It's really true. It's because on some level, no matter how much alien or off-planet DNA you have, on some level, this is home to all of us. In our Earth experience, this is home. And it's so powerful. And just being here gets you in your body, which is so critical. I mean, this is the time when bodies are waking up, not just, minds and mental bodies and emotional bodies, and spiritual bodies and subtle physical bodies, but physical bodies. So Africa
I remember one of my teachers saying that in this time, and she's like, we will get to this time, and that we will be able to, more of our spirit, our soul, will be able to show in this physical body. Because they always say it's only like a small percentage of our soul is in here. So she's like, no, it's going to be full. That fullness that you felt in whatever experiences you had where you burst because you couldn't hold it. She's like, your physical body will now be able to hold that. in these times.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm excited. So now, your website, how can we get in touch with you?
Oh, sorry. Okay, www.emanationofpresence.org. And you could also look for victoriamoore.org. They'll both get you there. But it's Emanation of Presence.
Great. Wow, Victoria, this has been a quick hour, and we still could talk more, but we are going to talk more in the woo-woo hour, and, we'll talk a little bit about the trip, and then we'll do your deeper things, that these wild experiences that you've had, just dealing with spirit and on this beautiful spiritual journey of, I don't know, oneness? Yeah. Yeah, we can call it that. Yep. So thanks again for being our guest on Boundless Spirit Radio.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you very much for a really lovely chat and an opportunity to meet your public.
Great. Thank you. You've been listening to Boundless Spirit Radio with Charlene Springer and our guest Victoria Moore. And if you want to hear more, tune into the Woo Hour, where Victoria will share some more secrets with us and experiences. So we're excited about that. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Boundless Spirit goes off the rails. Next up in our members-only segment, the Woo Woo Hour. Whether it's happening on the planet, off the planet, or inside the planet, host Charlene Springer, expert guests, and you dare to go there in the Woo Woo Hour.